Hello and welcome to TUC0's Talks. It is the day of interviews, which I absolutely love. This is a time where we just get to sit down, have conversations, and see where we go. Today we're talking with Col Ron Stenger. He's a former boss of mine, Air Force Special Tactics, and now Air Force Special Warfare. And what an amazing leader he is. He used to sit down and just have great conversations with us, walk us through what we're trying to do, what we're trying to get done. And if I was going to pick one leader that I would like to have a conversation with, it would absolutely be Col Stenger. In that vein, he definitely will sit down and give you all the details that he needs. So I expect this to be a longer message than normal, which is great because we'll get a lot of very good points. So buckle down, get ready. This is our interview with Col Ron Stenger. Hello and welcome to TUC0's Talks. It is the day of interviews, which I look forward to every time, but especially this time. We've got Col Ron Stenger here, a former boss of mine, and I could not be more excited for today. So, Col Stenger, how are we doing today?
Good. I appreciate it. Definitely appreciate the invitation to be on your podcast. I was pretty excited when you reached out.
Oh man, I appreciate it. When I was coming up with this idea, I was like, all right, I'm going to talk to those people that I think are doing it right, that are exciting, and that we can learn a lot from. And you were number one on the list. So the expectations are high. I hope that you are appreciating the time as well. So before we get into it, man, I'd just like you to take an opportunity to talk about what your career has been like and what you've learned from it.
Yeah. So, start to finish, I was in uniform just a little over 30 years. Went to the Air Force Academy in 1988. Didn't really know what I wanted to do. Kind of funny story in terms of getting into the academy. This is pre-internet, pre-cell phone. They sent me the wrong letter, told me thanks for applying, but you're going to have to do something else with your life because you didn't get in. Frankly, I didn't even want to go to the academy. My stepfather helped me with the application. I didn't know any better. Come to find out, they sent me the wrong letter, like I said. So my liaison officer called me up about 2 weeks before basic was supposed to start. It's like, hey, the academy wants to know what you're going to do. Like, I don't understand. I didn't get in, so why do they care what I'm going to do? Like, no, you got in. I'm like, that's not what my letter says. So let me make some calls. So he calls me back in a few minutes. It's like, yeah, you got in, but you got to let me know what you're going to do. I was like, so I go to the academy. I get to go through survival training and jump out of airplanes. It's like, yeah. I'm like, all right, I'll go. He's like, okay then. So that was the start of my adventure. While I was there, didn't really know about special tactics. Back then it was just called combat control. I had every intention to just inter-service transfer to the Navy and give a go at BUD/S. It was my junior year that I found out about combat control. I applied. I didn't even get accepted to tryouts. So I marched right down to cadet personnel and said, hey, I want to forego my commission. I want to enlist and be a combat controller. Caused create panic across the enterprise. Like, wait, you want to do what? You're not supposed to do that. I was like, well, I did my research. It seems that I can. So lo and behold, the senior most combat controller in the Air Force at the time gives me a call. Like, here, young man, that's not what you want to do. We're going to have some more tryouts, right after you graduate, give it another go and see how it works out. So that's what I did. I got picked up. Unfortunately, I got hurt in the pipeline. Once I got healthy, I went to tryouts again, and I did not get picked up this time. And so then I gave it one more go. Third time, got picked up, finished the pipeline, a little bit older and wiser maybe, but not quite as fit as I once was. And then spent the rest of my career in special tactics. Obviously, the last assignment, you and I worked together. Probably one of the highlights of my career, where we got to kind of fundamentally revamp the training enterprise in terms of how we assess, select, and train future operators. So did a lot of different things in between. Spent some time on team. Fortunate enough to have two teams. Nowadays, that's more common. Back then, that wasn't necessarily the case. spent way too much time on staffs, but in hindsight, I probably learned more about how the national defense enterprise actually works. So was, in hindsight, grateful for those opportunities, and I think everything led me to have the right skills and the capabilities when it came time to revamp the training enterprise at the tail end of my career.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So I'm going to go off script. So obviously we talked about some things that we wanted to do, but you said something that just led me to, man, if there's one thing that you taught me, it's I did my research. And you said that, and you were like, I did my research and I can. And so that was one of the things that you, like, if I ever came to you with something, he's like, did you look it up? Did you go look? Or did you just listen to what people said? Find a way in the meeting and figure it out. And so talk to me about, where did you learn that? Like, go do your research.
So definitely had a less than ideal childhood. So I probably spent more time in the library and just trying to occupy myself. So some of it probably started from there. But that in between time when I wasn't in the pipeline, I was an air traffic controller in the Air Force. And air traffic controllers live and die by the .65, which is the FAA governance for everything you do with air traffic control. And air traffic controllers, especially in the Air Force, are notorious for eating their young. They're just hard on the new controllers. And they expect you to know that .65 like the back of your hand. So not quite research, but certainly studying and learning and knowing. And frankly, the more time I spent in the military, the more I come to understand that there are very few innovators left. People that really are pushing the envelope. There's a lot of replicators. They'll keep doing what they've seen or what they've been told, but they don't necessarily know why they're doing it or whether or not it's the best approach or the best thing to do. The thing that drew me to combat control early on was I felt like it was one of those career fields where there wasn't a book answer for everything. There wasn't a checklist. It was just a bunch of dudes getting after hard problems and having to solve them essentially on the fly. Now, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but it really was. You think all the way back to Desert One when Coach Carney went in, on an agency bird and set up a box and one in the desert. All that was new and the approach was new. The mission ultimately wasn't a success, but man, he was creatively getting out there on the edge, on the fringe, and figuring it out. And that was my experience throughout my career in special tactics. As we got bigger, when I came in, there were maybe 50 combat control officers. By the time I got out, I think there were probably at least, 150, maybe closer to 200. And then you throw in the TAC-P officers and the combat rescue officers, the fleet was probably almost 10 times as big. So it changed fundamentally. So some of that checklisty book answer vibe is probably seeped into the community a little bit, but I was always just hardwired to kind of think outside the box, look around the corners, and if you're going to do that, it just makes sense to do your research, do your homework, to look at lessons learned, to look at precedents, best practice. I think all those things fold into a creative, innovative kind of posture. And, when you and I served together, as we revamped the training enterprise, I was often accused of kind of being the opposite of a micromanager, giving too much latitude. But I didn't want people to run with scissors, but I wanted them to walk fast with scissors and be willing to fail forward, because discovery learning sometimes is the best learning. Because you're learning real time what doesn't work and what does. So yeah, I'm just wired that way. I can't help it.
No, and it was fantastic because you gave us a lot of freedom, but you held us to the standard. Like, if we didn't know the -1, if we didn't know the answers, I remember sitting in and you were like, we don't know what we're doing. We're building this as we go. You have to know what you're doing. And if you're going to break a rule, you have to know the rule and you have to accept the consequences of it. And so I knew every time I was going to go to you with something that I did, I better know the rule. I better know exactly why I did it, or it's on me. And so I definitely appreciated that, and that is always something
One
that
quick
I
alibi,
love that.
something you just said about, breaking rules, and that's something I think we encountered a lot as we were standing up the training enterprise. And I'd use a bit of a silly analogy. I've been known to use analogies on occasion. Um, when organizations, bureaucratic organizations, you know, often their first take on things is no. It's a bit to mitigate risk. Bureaucracies can't make fast decisions, so they can't make fast bad decisions or fast good decisions. It's blind to which way that goes. So it's a bit of a protective mechanism. But oftentimes people will point to regulations or Air Force instructions or rules or what have you. And I'd often remind folks, like, listen, when Moses came down the mountain, he didn't have 10 commandments plus that rule. Some person made that rule. It used to be something different. And when they changed it to what you're now, reciting to me, everybody lost their mind. But now it's gospel. So there's nothing to prevent us from changing the rule again, if it makes sense. Don't change for the sake of change. I think that's one of the most disastrous things leaders and organizations can do. And oftentimes I think they kind of get sucked into doing that. If you're going to drive change, know why you're doing it and know what your outcome's going to be.
Yeah, man, that's so good, and it's good to hear. And I'm just sort of like, golly, I forgot a lot of this stuff, and just be reminded of that, and knowing the name on page 3. I mean, who's the approval authority to get there? So that's good. All right, so you're now. I want you to think back. You have the 5 commanders in a room that you're charging to develop and build this team. What's going through your mind as you're preparing to talk to us? Like, how are you building this team, and what's going through your mind there?
Yeah, that's a big question. And for your listeners, you kind of gave me some cliff notes ahead of time. So I've been thinking on this for a little bit, in terms of what goes into building a team. I had some advantages, in terms of what you just described when we stood up the group that didn't exist previously, and we brought in 5 squadron commanders. I got to pick my kickball team, in essence. And very rarely in the military, or frankly any organization, do you get to do that. You have who you have, and it's probably a mixed fleet of rock stars, average, kind of performers for a variety of reasons. Maybe it's capacity, maybe it's a choice. Sometimes you have experience, sometimes you have new. So I was advantaged right out of the gate by being able to pick my team. And, I don't know if you remember this or not, but there were commanders that were on the list to be on the team that I ended up pivoting because of, things they started to display or tendencies they demonstrated that it just wasn't going to be a good fit. The Air Force, in big organizations, so it's not just the Air Force. I don't want to, make it sound like the Air Force has got this wrong, because I think most big organizations do. By and large, in established companies or big organizations, people get, especially leaders, get a little bit comfortable or complacent because they tend to take over existing efforts or smaller sub-organizations, and there is no real thought or responsibility towards getting things where they need to be. It's more of I got to maintain what we have. And sure, every leader tends to want to put their thumbprint in some small way, but creating brand new efforts, organizations, or capabilities is truly unique, and not everybody's cut out for it. So I was looking for leaders that I thought, it was speculative at best, could handle those responsibilities, because it's not the same as taking over something that's already running, where you've got a whole team that's already in place doing the job, and we're just changing out who's driving the mechanism. Oftentimes you can move a leader from an organization. If that organization is already running well, it's going to continue to run well. It may fray here or there, because it's lacking some of the key aspects of what a good leader or management team brings. But the mission's still going to get done. But bigger than that, if I think back, you know, how do you build a team? What's the size of the team? Is it an existing team or is it a new team? What's the roster look like? You got some vets, you got some new guys. Is it mixed? How long is this team going to be together? Is it a long-term team? Is it a short-term team? And then what's the team's purpose? Is it a single task? Is it multifaceted? Lots of responsibilities, lots of functions. I think you got to kind of go through those questions to start to shape your approach. And then what I would say is, you got to kind of have an idea of mission, vision, some key elements that I think always go into it, kind of roles and responsibilities for the team members. You got to understand what that is, and maybe some rules of engagement, if you will, norms of behavior, the things you can't do, the things you have to do, maybe your circumstances or situation. I could go on a few other things, but I would say, understanding the point of the team is a big part of that.
Man, that's so good, because people want to know, if I just do A, B, C, I can build a great team. And those are the questions that you need to be asking. Like, it's going to change. And that's the point of a leader, is to be able to get all that information, decipher it down, and figure out, all right, where am I going? And I saw that all the time in the military, but even when I've been out in the civilian world, it just is, hey, I'm going to have to reinvent a lot of things, because we've been doing organizational, systematic things probably the wrong way a lot of the times. Yeah. And now I'm having to come back and sort of fix that. And those are great.
Yeah.
I'm going to pivot here.
Okay.
Because I want you to sort of, if you can, go behind the curtain. You created an innovation sort of subsection of our organization.
Sure.
At least to me, it was new. Like, I didn't see it coming, and then all of a sudden you were like, hey, we're going to do it. You chopped off people and put them in this area and did that. That's, in our world, crazy. Like, it hasn't been done. It would be like, wild theory. What was the reaction when you went to someone and told them, because I don't think you asked permission, told them that you were going to do this?
Yeah, I'm honestly not even sure I actually ever told anybody. So, full disclosure, it wasn't my original idea. I saw one of the Naval Special Warfare groups do that. So I knew one of the commanders on the West Coast, and he had explained to me what he did. He had taken 2 young lieutenants that were just off a platoon rotation. He's like, hey, here's some money, here's some time, go make us better. I'll let you fail 19 times out of 20, but at least 1 out of 20, you better do something to improve our capability. I was like, man, that's freaking genius. Obviously, innovation is commonplace nowadays. It's almost cliche. Everybody's got a works, if you will, soft works, works, so on, cyber works, which is good. I think sometimes if you put too much structure on innovation, you could argue maybe it's not really innovation. It's more, it's establishment, if you will. I did it for a couple of reasons. One, I genuinely wanted some folks other than me. And frankly, if you recall who was on that roster early on, there weren't any operators. And frankly, there weren't any people that had spent time in or around our community. So I wanted people who were unfamiliar with us enough to approach things in novel, unexpected ways and really just impress upon them the freedom of maneuver. So, I didn't know where things were going to go when we started, but within the first year, they had a green room or a blue room, whatever you want to call it, to where they could make their own, videos. They were working on AR, VR. They had 3D printers. We had young enlisted cyber operators who were just cut loose to code and program and try to solve some of the training management issues we had. So really let them go wherever they wanted to. I'm not sure if the return on investment justified the approach. And frankly, I'm not even sure if they still have the innovation cell, 5+ years later. But what I think it did beyond actually giving, tangible results was it was a out loud example of, hey, I'm willing to let people fail and just keep pressing forward. I'm willing to let people think creatively like we've never done before. It's when you buy a house that's been lived in before, the easy thing to do is paint the walls, buy some different furniture. Yeah, it's different, but is it really different? Until you start knocking down some walls, ripping out some floors, renovating the bathrooms or the kitchen, or even put an addition on there or something. Have you fundamentally changed anything, or just bulldoze that sucker down and build your dream house with everything you ever wanted? So I really wanted to give an out loud example, like, hey, we really want to meaningfully change the way we're getting after stuff. So for the folks that aren't familiar with our community, special tactics, now special warfare, a broader moniker within the Air Force, was notoriously undermanned for a variety of reasons. That manning, that in strength always starts from the training pipeline, the training enterprise. And there was always a very, very high attrition rate. But there were some interesting things that, I had observed during my career, where if somebody who was already an operator, who's already out there doing the mission operationally, ever took an interest in somebody aspiring to join the force, and they mentored that person and they helped them get ready, that aspiring operator was almost always successful. So I wondered why we couldn't take that approach. Now, I'm not talking about milk and cookies and hugs. This training is, by design, difficult. It has to be, because once you're on the other side of it, especially in Air Force Special Warfare, you can find yourself as a singleton or part of a very small team. We can be dropped in the middle of an ODA or SEAL platoon or coalition soft, or work unilaterally. You never know what we're going to get. So you've got to have somebody who's got phenomenal character, integrity, is willing to problem solve and work under just about any imaginable condition. But I thought we could do things smarter, better than we had historically done them. So the innovation cell was kind of an analog to showing everybody we're really going to invest in doing things differently.
Yeah, and it did. Like, it gave me so much freedom of maneuver to, if I didn't personally think I could pull it off, I'd go to the innovation cell and say, hey, here's my problem. What can you do? And so I love that. Hey, it may not have been worth it overall, but for what it did for us individually and gave us that, it absolutely met the mark. And so
one
it was
thing you did,
us.
Chris, and I still use this example today because it was innovation. It was organizational innovation. I get frustrated sometimes when people talk innovation. They always think widgets or maybe software, but they always think it's this new thing. And innovation can be ideas. They can be your approach. They can be organizational innovations. There's lots of ways to innovate. And one of the things that you and your chief did, and it was not directed by me. I don't even know if I ever mentioned it. I certainly thought it, but I saw you all do it. So as we talked about this paradigm shift in how we approach training, the schoolhouse you ran for TAC-Ps definitely had some attrition challenges. Production was struggling. And part of that, you had some phenomenal operators as instructors, but just because you're a good operator doesn't mean you're a good instructor. And when, the rules of engagement, I mentioned that earlier, change, those instructors needed to be able to pivot. And you all found that you had quite a few instructors that weren't willing to pivot. And it wasn't that they weren't good guys. They were phenomenal Americans that had done many, many things for our country that will probably never be known. They'll never get the gratitude they deserve. But you understood that that was a limiting factor to what you were trying to accomplish. So you wholesale, I think you might have moved out 20 instructors back to operational units, and you brought in new instructors to execute the vision that you and the chief had. And it fundamentally changed, your approach, and created success that, frankly, catapulted you in front of all the other, specialties within special warfare of, getting after what the intention of revamping the training enterprise was all about. So there's lots of ways to innovate.
Yeah, and I always tell people this. I was like, I'm not a great leader, but I know good leaders when I see them, and I listen to them. And so my chiefs, both times I was at the schoolhouse, were phenomenal leaders that I could count on to sort of listen to me and then sort of correct me and corral me back in when,
100%.
Hey, that was a dumb idea. All right, I got it. We'll work it. All right, so you have this team, and you're building it. You're asking the right questions. You're getting into it. How do you set that vision of, all right, picture this. This is what it's going to look like. Here's where we want to go. How do you come up with the vision? How do you tell people?
Sure. So I would say, unless you're, a single founder, or, maybe there's a duo, there's two founders. I think the founders have a responsibility and an obligation to establish that vision. When it's a broader team, I think it's important for it to be collaborative. Because everybody's going to have equity in that vision, in that mission, as well as the outcome. I think it's a discussion, it's a dialogue. In terms of how do you get buy-in and understanding, you almost answered it in the question. I think you said paint the picture, but I would say, how do you tell the story? So I think one of the most effective ways to communicate is storytelling. People can relate to that more. And that's how people remember. And I think you tell that story it's almost like you're a broken record. You just continue to promulgate that until people are telling you the story back. And the story will start to kind of evolve and change a little bit, and that's okay. Mission and vision, more so vision, doesn't have to stay static, because your circumstances in your environment don't remain static. So I think having a little bit of latitude to grow and to change as warranted is okay, but it's a conversation, and then it's a testing of the waters, and then it's changes as necessary, not change for change's sake, but change because it's going to make the vision and the approach better. That's what I would say. And ultimately, a vision is an aspirational instinct. I would say desired instinct in the military. I would say it's a bit aspirational, and that's where I want to be. So on an individual level, I would say I don't have a vision statement necessarily for myself. I have a mission statement, but for my vision statement, what I have that's probably essentially the same thing is I know what I want my legacy to be. So when I'm gone, I know what I hope, what I aspirationally want others to remember about me. So, and I'm the founder of me, I get to decide what that is. So, I authored that by myself. And over the years, it tweaked, as I learned a little bit more about life and maybe extended myself a little bit more grace. Some of that softened and maybe some of it refocused a little bit.
No, that's good. I love that aspirational. That's what we're hoping that will come about as we're working that. All right. So we've been talking a lot about mid-level leaders and some upper-level
Sure.
leaders, but let's go back and talk about brand new leaders. All right. So if you're in the military, you just graduated, you're a second lieutenant or maybe first lieutenant, and you've been given a unit, or if you're in the civilian world, you've just moved up to a manager, a lower level leader type. What's important for them to know? What's that first thing that you're like, hey, this is the key point?
Wow. So I think I can give you kind of the key point, but I would tell you I've got a bit of a laundry list as I thought about this question. I'm going to caveat kind of full disclosure before I give these things. I spent 30 years in the military. I've been working in the civilian sector now for a little over 5 years. It's taken all of those 35, 36 years for me to kind of figure this out. Some of this came earlier and easier. Some of it was much later in the game. So I don't want young leaders or new leaders to feel discouraged or frustrated that they haven't thought about these things. Some of them are intuitive and like, oh yeah, I got that. Some of them aren't, and that's okay. That's part of the journey and the progress. And frankly, for anybody listening, I hope they add to this or they refine this and make it better. But in terms of the one thing, I would say know yourself. That's a pretty simple 2-word phrase, but it's got tremendous depth in meaning. So when I say know yourself, that there's some self-honesty there. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What are your values? Where do your morals originate? How you treat others, how you treat yourself. What are your priorities in life? Know yourself. I will tell you, especially as a young second lieutenant going through our training pipeline, I think back to some of the, we'll say, leadership dilemmas that I encountered, and I made bad decisions. Oftentimes those bad decisions were inaction because I didn't know any better, or I was enamored by these senior NCOs or senior officers and I wanted to be what they were. I was aspiring to join their ranks, and it was a gauntlet to get there. So I figured if they were doing these things, they must be good, and that wasn't the case. I didn't stick to what I knew to be right or good in some instances. So it gave me some regrets, but I think those regrets drove some learning and some understanding that down the road allowed me to be a bit more firm in my personal lines and expectations.
Yeah, that's hard, right? Because you're looking up to people and you're like, these guys are the ones that are doing it right, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe my thought pattern is wrong, and you start heading down a direction, and then you're like, oh no, this is not where I want to be. I had it right to begin with. All right.
If I could rattle off a couple other things, Chris, I'll
go
through these pretty quick, but I think they're equally important. Once you know yourself, be resolute, be set in purpose. Try not to deviate from that. I don't want you to be overly rigid, but to the extent you ought to be resolute in what you've decided you stand for. Be disciplined, be organized, be prepared, be authentic. I've got quite the eclectic group of friends from every walk of life, but there's one thing they all have in common. They're genuine. There's no facade. They're not putting on airs. They're not trying to be what they think I want to see in them. They're authentically themselves. At the same time, there's some folks I work with who it's clear they're not being their authentic selves, Um, and it starts to make me question, can I trust this person? Why are they insecure? Do they have ulterior motives? So, being authentic is important. As a leader, just as a human, having a sense of humor is super important. Sometimes it's going to get you through difficult or challenging times. Other times it can help other folks get through the difficulty or the challenges. Surround yourself with mentors and friends, peers who will keep you honest. We kind of talked about that a little bit earlier. Your chief, served that role for you. So many chiefs I worked with the same way. There's people who have worked for me that have done that for me. So don't think it's just got to be, a peer or somebody senior to do. It can, out of the mouths of babes kind of comes wisdom, that sort of saying, which I probably completely screwed up, but you know what I'm getting after. I would say never stop learning, whether that's reading, writing, speaking, creating, experiencing, exploring, honing, practicing what you've learned. Stay fit. I don't care what, this isn't just about being in the military. Just, if you're going to be your best, you need to be fit. You need to be healthy. Put in an honest day's work every day. Out prepare, out knowledge, out work. That's your goal. It's an internal unspoken competitiveness in me. I always want to out prepare everybody else. I always want to out knowledge them. I always want to outwork. Let me assure you, it doesn't always happen. I get humbled on a daily basis, which I don't mind because that just fuels the fire for the next day to out prepare, to out knowledge, to outwork. Practice discipline. Discipline isn't something that's on or off. It takes practice. Practice it. Work hard. Pursue excellence. You may only achieve it once or twice in your life, but pursue it. Cultivate reason and wisdom. There's a lot to unpack in that small statement, but it's one of the things that, the 7 days of the week, I've got different reminders for myself as I get up in the morning and I journal. Cultivate reason and wisdom is one of the things on one of the days. And I just want to be more logical and more wise every day of my life. So I'm trying to cultivate that. Have a leadership philosophy. If you're going to be a young leader, you're like, I'm only supervising 2 people, or, it's just a short tenure as a leader. It's okay. Know what's important to you as a leader. For me, integrity, excellence, warrior ethos. And that doesn't just apply to the military. A part of warrior ethos is being disciplined or having a martial spirit, which ties right back to fitness. It can be other things, but it doesn't have to be, warfare centric. Lead by example, teamwork, courage. Courage is, I think, one of the most important attributes of a leader. And it's not necessarily valor on a battlefield. When you're faced with a leadership dilemma, you have to have courage to do the right thing because it's almost always going to come with at least short-term consequence. So knowing yourself, knowing what you think is right, what you think is wrong, what's good or bad, or knowing how it might affect others, have the courage to stand by what you know. Listen more, talk less. Leaders should be very much, in my opinion, servant leaders. You're there to support everybody else because at the end of the day, frankly, you're probably not even doing the mission. You're just making sure the folks that are doing the mission can do it to the best of their ability. So you're making sure they have the right resources, whether that's the roster size, the end strength, the manpower, the money, the time, the infrastructure, the policies, whatever it is. Your job is to make sure you do that, to maintain the morale, maintain the climate, the culture, to intervene when those things start to deviate from where they need to be. Avoid offering advice or opinion unless asked. I think that's particularly important for leaders. Sometimes we might get a bit full of ourselves. Like, whoa, I'm in charge. Not only am I very good looking and very funny, but I always know the right answer. Like, odds are that's not the case. you have the opportunity to lead, you have the privilege to lead, but don't confuse that with who you are as a person. You still put your pants on before your shoes like everybody else. Humility is important. Live simply, develop routine, try to maintain a Spartan existence. Simple is typically better. Don't gossip or malign others. These are just, some of these, is that leadership or is that just a good life rule? I would argue it's both. As a leader, know your mission, whether that's your organizational mission or your personal mission, whether, and then same with vision or legacy. Know your values, the organizational values or your personal values. One of the simplest things you can do maybe as a human is greet cheerfully and compliment sincerely. You just try to add that into your daily arsenal, and I bet you start to put some smiles on faces that you might not have expected. I've got these two lists that I've had now probably for about 15 years. One's called My Imperatives. So it's a list of about 10 things that they're my must-dos. They guide my actions, my behaviors, my thoughts. I don't get them right all the time, but they're always there. In fact, they're tattooed on my ribs. I've also got this other list called Intentions, and those are my aspirational behaviors. I get those wrong or fall short way more often, but I keep reviewing them and keep trying to tilt towards them. So that was a lot. It was quite of a laundry list, but those are things, again, over 35 years that I gathered, kind of distilled down to the essence, kind of the indivisible element of what, kind of caught my eye. But yeah, sorry for the laundry list.
No, that was so good. Like, I'm going to sit back and just enjoy going back through the list and making sure I get those. So it is one of those things where we are constantly just amazed at, we have these thoughts and then we falter on them and then we write them down and we come back and, all right, let's not make that mistake again. Let's not make that mistake again. And those leadership principles, if young leaders could just sit down and say, hey, I'm going to come up with that list and I'm going to work on those for the next 10 years of my life. And how much further along would we be? And that's great. Okay. So you said, one of the things you said is constantly be learning. So
Yep.
35 years in, you've gone through a lot. What are you learning now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, in the simplest sense, I'm still just trying to live my best life, to be the best across, the different categories of life, be the best Christian I can, the best husband, the best father, the best friend, the best teammate or coworker, to be a good citizen, at the end of the day, just be a good human. There are days, it's like, I'm stealing this, kind of, story, I guess, parable from somebody else, but it just made so much sense. Everybody's been in their car driving down the road, and you got the jerk that's just zipping in and out of traffic, driving like a freaking maniac, and you're like, that guy's an ass. He sucks. And then you got the other kind of driver that's going way too slow, that's in your way, and like, this guy's a moron. You're the only good driver on the road. I have a lot of days where I think I'm the only good driver on the road, but honestly, I'm somebody else's ass or I'm somebody else's moron. So I just continue to try to be a better human. And some days I got it really figured out, and some days I am so far on the wrong side of the bell curve. So I just keep working on that. One thing I've done better over the years, although I still struggle with it, if I'm being honest, is just giving myself a little bit more grace when I fall short of my expectations. I really am my own worst critic. I am so hard on myself, especially the inner monologue in my head. Either I'm falling short of what I think I should be doing, or I'm not what I once was. And it's just a difficult, I think it's probably something everybody deals with in life. I'm uber competitive, so maybe it's hitting me harder. And, I definitely have aspects of OCD and perfectionism. I will let best get in the way of good enough so many times. So, just being a little bit, more kind to myself is one of the things I'm still trying to learn. But, reading, I'm a huge reader. I think I maybe knocked out 20, 25 books last year. I don't do as many podcasts as I like. I'd like to roll that into my arsenal. But I will tell you, even though I read, probably close to 25 books last year, it still feels insufficient. When I think about all the books I want to read and how many years I probably have left on this panic, straight causes me anxiety because I know I'm not going to finish the list. But I do enjoy in reading. I really do. And I flip-flop to kind of self-improvement to nonfiction to fiction. I had really kind of taken a break from fiction for a long time and picked that up over the last year or two. And, it's a refreshing change to inject those every once in a while. And it definitely opens my mind to what I think are the important aspects of diversity of thought, diversity of opinion. So I enjoy that. And I see that more, honestly, in the fiction books. And then I'm trying to excel in my new civilian career. I definitely enjoy it, but it's unlike anything I ever did before. So I definitely appreciate the challenge, but it's harder than anything I've done before because it's not familiar. So I feel like I'm picking it up reasonably quick, but it's still new, so it's got its difficulties. But that's where I'm focused. Right when I got out of the military, I went back to school for a year. I went to Stanford's Graduate School of Business and did a year-long executive education program while working full-time. That was too much. By the time I got to the last quarter, I was smoked, and it took all I had to power through. And then I've continued. I always try to do one or two, courses or seminars every year. Typically, one's more kind of warrior ethos or martial spirit kind of focused. Could be, going through a refresher in first responder training, or it could be a shooting course, or a jiu-jitsu seminar, something along those lines. And then I'll do other things that are more, academic or creative in nature, whether that's a cooking class or a dance class or something like that.
Yeah, no, there's so many things that we can be learning, and I love just the approach of not, hey, I'm going to try this one thing, but I'm going to self-improve on multi levels of who I am as a person. And as you always said, just be a good human. And that's always been related to me. And I'm like, yeah, man, I got to be better at that. All right. We have absolutely crushed every aspect of this. But I do want to say, what is it that you are thinking, okay, here's what I really think that these young leaders should know?
Yeah. I would say, this transcends just being young leaders. These are things I tell my adult kids. These are the things that are front of mind for me personally. Start with a couple quotes. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act, but there's a debate on who said that. Whether it was Aristotle or if Will Durant, paraphrased Aristotle. But regardless, the meaning, I think, is important. So it's what you do every day, the grind, that ultimately determines, who you are. So establish those good habits. For me, I try to go to bed at 8 and I wake up at 4. Do I get that right every day? Nope. But most days I do. So that habit is helping me. There's other things along those same lines that I think is a good azimuth for us. Be as you wish to seem. So if you aspire to be something, and act like you're that something. Be what you want to be. Don't wait for it to arrive. It's not going to happen tomorrow. Make it start happening today. Create a life of consequence. Make sure what you're doing matters. Doesn't mean people have to remember you. Doesn't mean they have to name streets after you or erect a statue. But know what you're doing is making a difference. And kind of hand in hand with that is forge an honorable and worthwhile legacy. If you know yourself and you're sticking true to your values, that will, give you the path to create that honorable and worthwhile legacy. It doesn't have to be, this amazing big thing. It can be simple. It doesn't have to be extravagant. Just do what you do really well. Be ready, stay vigilant. The world, in my opinion, is on fire. Our country's lost its mind. Be ready, stay vigilant, I think is more important than it's ever been. Somebody might ask, well, be ready for what? Or vigilance towards what? It's like, exactly. You don't know. So be ready, stay vigilant, because you don't want to figure it out after you discover what it is. Think through that. That could be something going wrong at work, or it could be, apocalyptic happenings in the world. Who knows? But be ready and stay vigilant. But here's the last thing I'll say, and I've shared this more and more often. The longer I've kind of been walking the earth and kind of reflecting this. We all hear this when we're a kid, but it's very singular and focused. And over the years, I've expanded its meaning for me, and I think it makes a lot of sense. We all know the golden rule. Treat others like you'd want to be treated. Do unto others as you'd want them to do to you. Whatever version you know. But I would say, here's my bottom line. Apply the golden rule to everything, no matter the role or situation. So if you're a boss, be the boss you'd want to have. If you're a teammate, be the teammate you'd want to have. If you're a spouse, be the spouse you'd want to have. Whatever the rule is, whatever the situation, or whatever just whatever we're talking about, be what you think the ideal version is. If more people did that, I think, man, we'd have a lot fewer problems.
So true. And I talk to leaders all the time, and I just sit down and they're like, I don't know what they want. And I was like, well, okay, what would you want? How would you want your boss to treat this situation? All right, go do that. That's a starting point, right? And then we can adjust. So go be that person. That's awesome. Well, sir, I really appreciate you jumping on. I know it's time out of your schedule, and obviously you're busy. You've got a million things going on. But I appreciate it, and we will talk more later, and I appreciate it. So from Colonel Stenger and y'all have a fantastic week, and we'll talk to you then. This is TUC0's Wright. Check it off.